Chosen one, listen carefully, because what you walked through was not normal resistance, not ordinary jealousy, and not coincidence. What came against you was coordinated, calculated, and rooted in darkness, moving in whispers, envy, and unseen plots meant to drain your strength, confuse your heart, and sever your connection with Allah. They believed numbers would overpower you, that unity in falsehood would crush a lone believer, and that pressure would force you to break, but they forgot one eternal law of the universe. When Allah stands with a servant, no army can stand against them. While they gathered forces in secret, Allah surrounded you with protection in the unseen. While they planned your fall, Allah was writing your elevation, and while they expected fear, you were being fortified with faith. This is why they are terrified now, why their confidence has collapsed, and why your survival has become proof that a single servant anchored in tawakkul can defeat a system of darkness, because this was never won against many, this was won with Allah, and that is a battle already decided. Chosen one, understand this truth deeply, because it explains everything about why the opposition around you felt excessive, coordinated, and strangely desperate. They needed numbers because they had no light of their own, no inner authority, no spiritual grounding, and no truth to stand on individually, for darkness is never confident alone, and falsehood is never brave by itself. When a heart is empty of Allah's remembrance, it searches for validation through crowds, alliances, gossip, manipulation, and shared hostility, because a single dark soul cannot confront light without dissolving. And this is why they gathered, whispered, planned, recruited, and formed circles against you, believing that quantity could replace quality and noise could overpower truth. But they failed to realize that light does not compete with darkness, it simply exposes it, and Allah places such light within His chosen servants that even silence becomes threatening, and presence alone becomes disruptive, not because you were aggressive, arrogant, or confrontational, but because your alignment with truth revealed their inner corruption without effort, forcing them to see what they tried to hide from themselves. The Quran teaches us that falsehood is fleeting and fragile, while truth is firm and enduring, and this is why they required reinforcement while you stood alone with certainty. Because when Iman is rooted in the heart, one believer carries more weight than 1,000 united in deception, and Allah allows these gatherings of darkness only so that their weakness becomes visible, their intentions become exposed, and their dependence on numbers becomes proof that they were never strong to begin with, for if they truly had light, they would not fear yours, and if they truly had truth, they would not need a crowd to face a single servant protected by Allah. Chosen one, understand this with clarity and calm certainty, because many believers are shaken when they sense unseen pressure, spiritual resistance, or coordinated malice, yet few realize the divine reality behind it. What they called magic, manipulation, whispers, or hidden power, Allah called a test, never a sentence, never a defeat, and never a sign of abandonment. For in Islam, nothing in the seen or unseen moves without His permission, and no harm can touch a servant except by His will, and for a wisdom greater than human sight. They believed they were operating in secrecy, performing actions that would weaken you, distract your heart, cloud your mind, and pull you away from remembrance. But Allah was already aware of every intention before it entered their hearts, recording it not as dominance but as evidence against them, because when Allah allows such tests, it is not to elevate the enemy, but to refine the believer, to purify faith, strengthen reliance, and reveal the difference between those who claim Iman and those who live it under pressure. The Quran reminds us that sorcery has no power over those who trust in Allah, and even when a believer feels the weight of fatigue, confusion, or heaviness, it is not defeat. It is the fire that burns away attachment, arrogance, and false reliance, leaving behind sincerity and unshakable tawakkul. And this is why every attempt they made backfired, every whisper lost its hold, and every dark intention returned heavier upon them, because Allah turns what is meant for harm into a means of elevation. And when the test ends, the believer does not emerge, broken but clarified, protected, and spiritually fortified, while those who relied on darkness are left exposed, weakened, and fearful, realizing too late that they were never fighting a human being, but standing against the decree of Allah Himself. Chosen one, reflect on this truth with the depth of your soul, because outward appearances often lie, while the unseen reality tells a very different story. Yes, you stood alone in the physical sense, misunderstood, unsupported, isolated, and at times abandoned by those you expected to stand beside you. But you were never by yourself, not for a single moment, because Allah does not leave His sincere servants unattended. And when people step back, divine support steps forward. While they saw one individual with limited resources, Allah saw a heart anchored in tawakkul, surrounded by angels who guard, record, and assist by His command. For the Quran reminds us that Allah is the protector of those who believe, bringing them out from darkness into light. And this protection does not always appear as ease or comfort, but as strength to endure, clarity to perceive, and stability when everything else shakes. They miscalculated because they counted bodies and ignored barakah. They measured power in numbers and ignored dua, and they trusted coordination while you trusted Allah, forgetting that one servant supported by divine will outweighs any collective rooted in fear and falsehood, just as Musa, peace be upon him, stood before an army with only certainty in his heart, and Allah split the sea itself to prove that isolation does not mean abandonment. Every moment you thought you were carrying the burden alone, Allah was carrying you through it, shielding your heart from despair, redirecting harm away from you, and turning loneliness into intimacy with Him, until you emerged with a faith that no crowd could give you and no opposition could take away, realizing that standing alone with Allah is never loneliness. It is the highest form of strength. Chosen one, grasp this reality with full awareness, because this is the exact point where the unseen battlefield shifted in your favor, even though nothing visibly changed on the surface. Their fear did not begin when you spoke back, defended yourself, exposed anyone, or proved anything. It began the moment you did not break, when the weight increased, yet your Iman remained upright, when the pressure became relentless, yet your heart did not turn bitter, when the isolation deepened, yet your reliance on Allah became stronger instead of weaker. Because darkness feeds on emotional collapse, on panic, on reactive anger, on desperation and loss of control. And when it encounters a believer who absorbs pressure without losing their moral center, it does not know how to proceed. They expected you to unravel, to react impulsively, to defend yourself obsessively, to fall into fear, doubt, or retaliation. But instead they watched you endure with sabor, move with restraint, and maintain your character under conditions designed to destroy it. And this is what terrified them, because systems of manipulation only work when the target is emotionally accessible, and the moment you stopped leaking fear, explanations, and reactions, their access to you began to die. Allah says in the Quran that He is with those who are patient, and that divine companionship manifested not in the removal of the trial, but in the strength Allah placed within you to remain calm while being provoked, dignified while being disrespected, and spiritually anchored while being tested beyond what looked reasonable. And every day you remained steady. They felt something slipping away, their sense of control, their confidence, their belief that pressure guarantees victory. They intensified their efforts, because desperation always follows the loss of dominance, but each escalation only confirmed their failure, because instead of fear, they met silence. Instead of chaos, they met composure, and instead of collapse, they met growth. And this psychological and spiritual stability unsettled them more than confrontation ever could, because it forced them to face a truth they were avoiding: that your strength did not come from circumstances, people, or approval, but from a direct connection with Allah that could not be severed by stress, isolation, or attack. Every time you chose prayer over panic, restraint over revenge, and trust over obsession, their fear multiplied, because they realized you were no longer fighting on their level, no longer accessible through emotional hooks, and no longer governed by outcomes they could influence. And this is why Allah allows prolonged pressure on His chosen servants, not to break them, but to demonstrate to the seen and unseen that Iman rooted in sincerity does not fracture under force. And when you emerge still standing, still believing, still controlled, still principled, they understood something deeply unsettling. If you did not break at your weakest point, you will not break at your strongest, because Allah had already fortified your heart beyond their reach. And once a believer reaches that station, fear permanently changes sides, leaving the oppressors anxious, unstable, and haunted by the reality that the one they tried to destroy became untouchable by simply refusing to fall. Chosen one, understand this with a depth that settles permanently in your heart, because what you experienced was not merely survival, it was initiation, and initiation only comes through pressure that would have destroyed someone who was not chosen. For Allah does not elevate a servant casually, nor does He grant spiritual authority without first allowing a passage through fire that strips illusion, attachment, and false dependence. What they launched against you with hatred, coordination, whispers, envy, and calculated harm was never meant to end you, even though they believed it would, because Allah repurposed every strike, every betrayal, every unseen attempt, and every moment of isolation into a divine process that marked your transition from potential to position, from innocence to discernment, and from vulnerability to spiritual authority. For in the unseen realm, attacks are not always opposition. They are often summons, and Allah allowed you to be targeted because He was preparing you to operate on a level where comfort would have made you weak and ease would have kept you blind. Each attempt to destabilize you forced you inward, away from people and closer to Allah, where your dua became sharper, your awareness deeper, and your reliance purer, until you no longer needed validation, explanations, or protection from creation, because you learned to take refuge directly in the Creator. And this shift terrified those who attacked you, because they unknowingly helped sever the final emotional ties that gave them influence over you. The Quran teaches us that Allah replaces loss with something better for those who remain patient. But what many do not realize is that better is not always material. It is often clarity, authority, and weight in the unseen. And through their attacks, Allah taught you what to guard, who to trust, when to remain silent, and how to stand firm without becoming hard-hearted. And these are qualities that cannot be taught in peace. They thought they were breaking you down, but Allah was stripping away what did not belong to the version of you. He was building, burning away naivety, misplaced mercy, and excessive attachment, replacing them with wisdom, restraint, and precision, so that when you emerged, you were no longer spiritually accessible to manipulation or emotionally vulnerable to the same weapons. And this is why they cannot reach you now in the same way. Because initiation permanently changes the internal structure of a believer. What once triggered you now reveals others. What once hurt you now instructs you, and what once threatened you now confirms Allah's protection. And this is the divine irony of their failure. Every attack became a lesson, every wound became awareness, and every attempt to pull you into darkness forced you to develop a stronger light, until you crossed a threshold they cannot follow. Because initiation is a door that only opens forward, never backward. Allah allowed them to play their role so that you could step into yours. And once that process was complete, the attacks lost their effectiveness, not because they stopped trying, but because you were no longer the same person they began attacking. And this is the mercy hidden inside the hardship, the elevation concealed within opposition, and the reason Allah permits certain battles for His chosen servants, not to humiliate them, but to authorize them, mark them, and prepare them for responsibilities that only those who have survived darkness without becoming dark are qualified to carry. Chosen one, understand this truth with precision and calm certainty, because this is where their entire system collapsed without you lifting a finger. They did not lose power when you confronted them, exposed them, argued back, or proved your innocence. They lost power the exact moment you stopped reacting, because every structure built on manipulation, emotional extraction, and psychological control survives only by feeding on response, fear, anger, explanations, obsession, and visible disturbance. And when you withdrew those reactions, you starved the very mechanism they depended on to influence you. Before this shift, they studied your triggers, provoked your emotions, tested your limits, and measured your responses, believing that if they could keep you emotionally engaged, defending yourself, questioning motives, replaying events, or carrying resentment, they could continue draining your energy and directing your focus away from Allah. But Allah granted you insight at the precise moment you needed it, teaching you that silence is not weakness, restraint is not defeat, and disengagement is not surrender, but strategic spiritual alignment. When you stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, stopped reacting to disrespect designed to provoke you, and stopped emotionally attending battles that Allah never assigned you, something shifted in the unseen, the flow of power reversed, because reaction is currency in the realm of darkness, and once you stopped paying, the system collapsed. Allah says in the Quran that the servants of the Most Merciful walk upon the earth with humility, and when the ignorant address them harshly, they respond with peace. And this divine instruction is not moral poetry, it is spiritual warfare, because when a believer refuses to descend into reactive behavior, they rise above the reach of manipulation. And this is exactly what happened to you. Your silence confused them, your composure unsettled them, and your lack of engagement made them reckless. because they were accustomed to controlling outcomes through emotional pressure, not realizing that emotional control ends the moment a believer anchors themselves fully in tawakkul and lets Allah handle reputation, justice, and outcomes. Every time you chose dhikr over rumination, prayer over panic, and trust over obsession, you reclaimed energy that had been leaking into fear, and with each act of restraint, their influence weakened because they could no longer read you, predict you, or steer you, and what they could not control, they began to fear. They escalated tactics not because they were winning, but because desperation always follows the loss of dominance, yet every escalation only highlighted their powerlessness, because instead of the chaos they expected, they met calm. Instead of retaliation, they met distance. And instead of emotional collapse, they met spiritual maturity, and this unsettled them more than any confrontation ever could, because it forced them to face the truth that your strength did not come from reactions, validation, or human approval, but from an internal alignment with Allah that could not be manipulated. When you stopped reacting, Allah took over the defense of your honor, the management of consequences, and the exposure of intentions. And He did it far more effectively than you ever could, because divine justice operates silently, gradually, and precisely, dismantling false structures from within while the believer remains protected. This is why the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught restraint under provocation and patience under harm, not because believers are passive, but because restraint removes access, and without access, darkness suffocates. Your refusal to react did not make you invisible, it made you untouchable, because emotional disengagement placed you outside their battlefield, where their weapons no longer functioned. And once a believer reaches this station, power permanently shifts, for reaction hands control to the oppressor, while surrendering the matter to Allah restores authority to the one who trusts Him. This is why after you stopped reacting, they became restless, anxious, and obsessed, replaying scenarios, seeking responses, and attempting to provoke engagement, because silence denies closure to those who thrive on control, and composure exposes those who depend on chaos. Allah allowed you to reach this level, not to isolate you, but to elevate you, teaching you that not every attack requires a response, not every accusation deserves clarification, and not every battle is yours to fight. And once you embodied this wisdom, their power dissolved completely, because the moment a believer stops reacting from the nafs and starts moving from trust, the enemy loses every entry point, every lever, and every advantage, leaving them powerless, unsettled, and fully exposed before the decree of Allah. Chosen one, understand this truth with the depth of your heart and the clarity of your soul, because what you endured and overcame is not just your personal victory, it is a living testament, a warning written in the unseen, and a lesson for anyone who attempts to challenge, manipulate, or harm those whom Allah has chosen. For your survival became a declaration that the one who protects the faithful does so with precision, power, and permanence, and that no plot, scheme, or alliance formed in secrecy can ever succeed against a servant firmly anchored in tawakkul. Those who opposed you, whether through jealousy, malice, coordinated whispers, envy, or manipulation, believed they were executing dominance, yet they inadvertently became instruments of your elevation, because Allah allows the unjust to act only to showcase His justice, and every attack they launched, every attempt to undermine your character, every gathering they formed to plot your downfall, only serve to expose their weakness and highlight your strength. For darkness is never confident in isolation, and light does not need validation. Light simply shines, quietly, unwaveringly, and in doing so, it illuminates the false structures built around it, revealing corruption, hypocrisy, and fragility that were never visible before. Your survival, therefore, became more than a personal triumph. It became a mirror for others, showing them that schemes against the righteous are doomed to fail, that opposition rooted in malice cannot withstand divine decree, and that attempts to control or manipulate a chosen servant are met not with defeat, but with spiritual empowerment and elevation. This is why those who watched, participated in, or even remotely benefited from their schemes are now unsettled, anxious, and fearful, because your calm endurance, unwavering character, and reliance on Allah became proof that there is an authority far greater than theirs, an intelligence far beyond human calculation, and a power in the unseen that renders numbers, strategy, and intimidation meaningless. Every whisper they spread against you, every alliance they formed to weaken you, every effort to provoke reaction or resentment ultimately rebounded upon them, because Allah transformed their malice into a showcase of His protection and their failure into a display of your invincibility, not as a result of your own strength alone, but because you trusted in Him, remained patient under attack, and allowed the trials to refine, not define you, shaping your presence into a force of divine warning that communicates more than words ever could. Do not underestimate those whom Allah shields, and do not attempt to overpower what He guards, for opposition against the chosen is opposition against the decree of the Most Merciful Himself. Your survival is therefore both a personal miracle and a universal message, for it demonstrates that the righteous cannot be destroyed by schemes, that patience and trust create a fortress stronger than any human effort, and that the trials designed to intimidate, weaken, or humiliate a chosen servant instead serve to prepare them, elevate them, and mark them as signs for the world, visible to those who observe, subtle yet undeniable, inspiring reflection, restraint, and humility, while simultaneously warning the arrogant, the unjust, and those who dwell in manipulation, because they now witness the consequences of attempting to challenge divine will, and in seeing your integrity, composure, and ultimate victory, they are forced to reckon with a truth they cannot escape. No army, no gang, no plan, no magic, no deceit, and no collective opposition can ever prevail against a servant protected, guided, and elevated by Allah. And those who try will live under the shadow of that warning for the rest of their lives, witnessing your rise, knowing they contributed to it, and realizing that what they intended for harm became the instrument of their own exposure and your exaltation, proving that survival for the chosen is not merely endurance, it is an announcement to the world, a sign for the faithful, and a warning for the unjust that divine protection is real, unbreakable, and always active for those who are aligned with Allah, making your life itself a testament, a message, and a barrier against darkness, because once a chosen servant passes through trial, emerges unshaken, and remains firm in character and faith. Their presence alone speaks louder than any words, teaches more than any lecture, and warns more powerfully than any punishment, forever marking them as untouchable, undeniable, and divinely shielded in a way that leaves both the oppressed inspired and the oppressors trembling. Chosen one, now you see the truth. Every attack, every whisper, Every attempt to break you was never stronger than the faith Allah placed in your heart. And though they gathered numbers, plots, and darkness, believing they could overpower a single human being, they forgot the one eternal reality: you were never alone. Every trial became a forge, every opposition a teacher, and every attempt to harm you a ladder, lifting you higher into strength, clarity, and divine authority. And your survival is no accident. It is a message written by Allah in the unseen, a warning to those who oppose truth, a light for those who seek guidance, and proof that faith anchored in Allah cannot be shaken, manipulated, or defeated. So stand firm. Chosen one, guard your heart, nurture your faith, and walk with patience, humility, and certainty, knowing that your trials are transforming you into a beacon, your endurance is inspiring the unseen, and your presence alone is reshaping the world around you. For the fear that once hunted you is now the fear that pursues them. The power they believed they held is now gone, and the victory you carry has already been recorded in the divine ledger. Remember, this is not the end, it is only the beginning, and your light will continue to shine, your strength will continue to grow, and Allah's protection will continue to surround you. So keep your heart connected to Him, your soul aligned with truth, and never forget that those who tried to destroy you have only strengthened you, and your rise will remain a warning and a lesson for generations to come, a living proof that the chosen are never defeated, only elevated, and that Allah fights for those who place their trust fully in Him.